So Colleen Szymanik. Joining me on the stage also is Firas Shari. We work for new hardware certification for Comcast. And we wanted to kind of share a little bit of our experience of the last year. We've started testing all the different chipsets that support 11AX. And we kind of wanted to walk through our process and a little bit about our journey and some of the things we learned so we could share with you. Hopefully we can get a lot of these issues and interop things that we're seeing fixed sooner than later. So we've been hearing a trend about a lot of data, right? So the data that I collected is, well, where do you start when you try to boil the ocean with something like this? So we look at the popular applications that are on our network. Anyone want to take a guess or fathom what number one is on our Netflix, right? So I don't actually have a breakdown of streaming versus downloaded or anything like that, but that's number one. Second, YouTube, thank you, YouTube. The interesting stat that I learned from that one was that half of the YouTube traffic is not just the TCP traffic, it's quick, right? So UDP matters, right? So as I'm trying to build in my head what I'm modeling, what environments I'm setting up, I'm looking at that like, well, I should have a lot of, obviously DNS, is on there, much further down, smaller packets, very just small transactional stuff, but UDP will be important for us to test and make sure we know that it works well and works concurrently, right? So that's interesting. There's, obviously a lot of video traffic. We're a service provider and a cable company. Clients. So a very popular fruit company is probably the majority of the popular clients that are out there. Some of the other statistics, so it's not very surprising or very fun, but some of the other statistics that we started building our environment on that I think is kind of interesting is the concurrency, right? Because the charter of 11AX is the high density, right? So how many concurrent devices are connected in a typical home? Now this audience would not be what I'd model, right? Because, most likely not everyone's home is gonna look like the homes that most of us have, right? So the interesting stat is that I get about 10, 11 devices in like the 85 percentile that are concurrently connected, about 4 on 2.4 and about 6 or 7 that are on 5 gigahertz. Okay, so that gives me somewhere to start. One of the other statistics that I find interesting that I've actually been following for a while is I have some telemetry data out there that actually gives me the interesting distribution of what the packet sizes are out there. So while the majority of traffic is in the 1500 byte packet range, the amount of small packets that are on our network has done nothing but grow in the last 3 or 4 years, which I find interesting. So it went from about 27%, which I thought was a pretty high number to begin with, in that 64 to 127 byte packet range, to 39%. That is crazy. And usually we don't market or we don't manage that kind of stuff. But that's something where I'm like, wow. So now I'm going to have high efficiency. And what's the charter? It's supposed to help that bottom 10%, right? So those small packets, take those resource units. Interesting. So I'm setting myself up probably for disappointment of expectations, but I like to think we have an environment that might really kind of play well for this new technology. So, of course, we also have to state what we want, right? So we wrote a technical requirement document. We put a whole bunch of table stakes in there about what's supported today, some thresholds on, service and how many devices are connected, what kind of service level we're looking at, what kind of bandwidth requirements we need, as well as, little things like OFDMA, uplink and downlink. Some of the differences that we see with that, actually, I think that's more interesting are the fact that some vendors or chipsets only support 4, some support 8. Some support 32 concurrently OFDMA. Have I tested that yet? No, I have not. But trust but verify, right? So if it's there, I think eventually it will come along the way. But it's something that I think is interesting that there's differences, right? So actually, my deep dive, which I love so far, is on the API side of things. And one of my instructors said yesterday that all the interesting things are happening in software. And as hardware engineers right now, I will say, yes, there are a lot of interesting things happening in software. But if you have poor hardware, your software is not necessarily going to fix that poor hardware, right? So we're going to get this right. We're going to do as best we can, right? So how am I setting up the test and what are we doing? All right. Oh, I'm running low. Okay, so we have the popular clients, the popular applications, we have the turntables, we have all the things that basically we normalize power, we normalize antennas. We kind of just set everything up to say, okay, this is the same as we could possibly make it. Throw the same traffic at it, let's see what the differences are. All right. So we get some charts and some charts and some charts and some charts and charts and charts and charts and charts and charts. Okay, what does that tell us? Well, some are better at one thing and better at others, you know, so it doesn't really help. And I must say, and I will turn this over to Stu, I must say that one of the things that I really hated for the longest time was the fact that people would measure success from just bandwidth. Well, I don't care necessarily about bandwidth. If I'm not being asked for, you know, a gig of traffic, doesn't mean my network's failing. It's okay, right? I should be able to serve what I'm asked for. How do I do that intelligently? But over the course of the last year, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of QA and chipset vendors and stuff, and they actually brought up the best scenario that I thought that actually justifies this in my head for being okay, which is bandwidth is the canary that sings, right? So it's not gonna exactly tell you that there's something wrong or that there's like, you know, what the problem is or that it's failing, but if you get a dip or something happens, it's singing, and you better go and dig and have the right tools and telemetry and everything set up that basically shows you like what's going on. So you dig, and we dug here, and one of the things that we found was that this client was dropping, so the bandwidth was going down pretty poorly. This is a cumulative distribution function. And we weren't getting any MPDUs. We did some packet captures and stuff. Turns out that there's an interrupt problem with MFP. So earlier today, we heard from OWE and SAE that MFP is mandatory, right? Well, it's mandatory, of course, for the Wi-Fi certification, but doesn't mean it's going to come out enabled, and it doesn't mean that it's going to work, right? So these are the trials and tribulations that we're going through. Let's talk through a couple more of them.
To go through this really quick. So basically what we see here is actually the endurance test. So like what Colleen said is like throughput tests are not the goal, they're the mean for to get to the hidden issues with. So what we see here is actually an A/B under endurance test in which we were like pushing 900 almost to the theoretical level, 900 Mbps on the uplink. The client was 3x3 80 megahertz VHT, and for some reason that like we collected the logs and like the data and like sent back to the vendor, but for some reason the A/B will continue working fine until a certain point in time when you see the drop between the offered load and the what is actually received. And the interesting thing that we saw here is basically that the AP kind of, you lose all connectivity to the AB at that point. So like you can't SSH into it, you can't telnet, you can't log on to the GUI, like you basically the AB kind of like it's frozen. And it won't go back to the original, like to a normal state until you stop the load. I mean, we're not sure what's going on, and like we sent everything back to the vendor. But if I would take an educated guess, I would say it's not a Wi-Fi issue. It's a more of something like eating up the processing power on this thing. The thing is, like, our testing is not only about Wi-Fi. We're not looking at like getting the best chipset only, but like we're looking at a whole solution that like will be integrated in in our next product. So, okay. And so, it's very hard to test something without having the right tools for it. And like, we don't have any clients for X. We don't have any, any tools to look at the package. So what we can look at it. So what we come up with is like the beacon. Everyone can look at the beacon. Even an A client can look at the beacon. So like, what we did is actually we captured the beacon for different clients, for different ABs, sorry. And we basically run analysis for it. So we looked at like what is supported from hardware perspective, what is supported from like on a roadmap, from software perspective, what the vendor is not interested in supporting it. And actually one of the interesting things we found are like some of the features that like those ABs were advertising, they were advertising incorrectly. So if you, I'm not sure if it's clear, but some of the green fields with the S in them, they have a little star on them. So basically those means whenever whenever you see those stars, means that like we actually saw that the AB was incorrectly advertising this this feature or this element, and when we actually faced a problem with it with on a certain AB on VHT, no matter what we did, we couldn't get the client to connect to 160. I know you guys hate 160, but bear with me here. So 160 short guard interval. So no matter what we did, we put them in a clean environment, and nothing worked. And then, when I was surprised, we went back and we saw actually the AB was advertising that it does not support this short guard interval, even though it did. Like, and the vendor said it does. One of the other things that we saw, like that we concluded through the throughput testing, is actually like small packet aggregation rate. So like around 45% of the traffic on our network is like small packets. So like it's very important for us to have an AP that is capable of aggregating like high volume of packets on the, with the small sizes. So like this plays a lot in our decision choosing what solution. If you can see, like at a certain point, the throughput is capped by the Ethernet, because like we're running traffic, like a downlink from the Ethernet to the Wi-Fi. So like we're capped at like 900 something. This is where all the like if you can see all the columns just like like almost they have the same value because of the Ethernet restriction. We had to include a heat map here. Everybody loves heat maps. So some of the vendors actually claim that like even with the new AX, we will see an improved VHT performance around like 10%, and we were trying to quantify this this improvement. So what we did is actually we took the new APs with the AX and compare them, to our old solutions that we have deployed in the field. And we run some, our home test solutions. We run some site surveys, to get RSSIs, to get like uplink and downlink throughput. To be fair, we saw an increase, but like nothing that like we can actually like see on user experience. Like it didn't really like show much of an improvement when it comes to the user experience, but from an abstract point of view, yes, it did. Like you can see that like the new chipsets had better performance when it comes to VHD. This is a very, very interesting case we had where the actual AB had only an issue with a single client, 80 megahertz VHT client. Like it will work fine with any type of client, but like if you specifically like connect a client with that, one spatial stream, 80 megahertz VHT, around the vicinity of minus 57 dBm, you will see a spike in the packet error rate. And for some reason, we still don't know what's causing it and what's the issue. We're trying to figure out what it is. This is coming from one of our, I guess, from distinguished engineers, Dave Urban, and we were talking about it, and he was thinking that it could be a problem with the LNA, the low noise amplifier. So basically, what you have here, like when you have an input, like to the an input signal, there is a point where like the signal drops under a certain threshold, where like instead of bypassing the low input, the low noise amplifier, you go through it. And from his experience, he thinks that this could be an issue with like transitioning from that, like transitioning from bypassing the amplifier to going through the amplifier. That could be the issue. We still don't know. We're looking at it and collected the data and send it to the vendor. Other tests we're doing is the RF testing. We use the XCA chambers. We're very wave, so we look at if the AB is complying with with FCC. But I mean, we don't really we think vendors do a really good job on this, but we just make sure we look at those stuff just to double check. We look at the spectrum mask. We look at the of course EVM is very important for us. It's a part of our TRD, so we look at that. We look at the constellations in all different MCS rates. So we also look at what's called spectral flatness. Excuse me. So this is an interesting case where you can see this is a 3x3 spatial 3x3 I think VHT 80 megahertz. Yeah, it's 80 megahertz. So if you can see here, like on antenna A, like the AB passes the spectral flatness test, but it doesn't actually do that in antenna B, and C. Like you can see little spikes going outside the borders here. This is where the limit is, because you have like the average between the difference between the average power and the power for each subcarrier on the off-DM should be around 4 dBm plus or minus, and then 6 dBm at the end. So like actually in this case, it kind of like, passes that important lessons that of things we learned from here, like test with the AB with every single device you can put your hands on, because like you never know which one of them will trigger an issue with the AB. RF testing is very important, making sure that like the physical layer is solid before like going to the MAC layer. That's very important. And thank you. Sorry, I mean we're already way behind our time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.